Aye.
Kinsman,
Aye.
Mitchell,
Here.
and Shearer,
Here.
and Greaves here. So we're all set. School Committee and Finance.
This is Jonathan Moore, Vice Chairman of the Finance Committee. I'd like to call our Finance Committee meeting to order. We'll take a roll call vote for the Triboard. Jonathan Moore here. Ashwini Salvi. Scott Warnetsky can't make it. Ryan Turncliffe.
Aye.
Jennifer Cooney.
Aye.
Jack Walsh.
Aye.
Ed Hart.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, for School Committee, Paul Kendall,
Here.
Mark Terry,
Here.
Kathy Bates,
Here.
Erin Williams. I don't think she's here yet. I haven't heard otherwise, and we can move forward, I think. I'm here.
Okay, so I guess we can just get started then.
Yep.
So we passed out the backup. We do have a presentation. We will go swiftly through the things we have already covered on previous meetings, so we won't belabor that. There are a couple new slides. There's a planting plan, and there's a couple watercolor renderings and things like that. So we'll take a few minutes to go through that, but we'll focus on the end of the presentation, which has the what we're all here for is the budget numbers and things like that. So if we're good to go, then Bill, if you want to fire up the presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Just give me half a second. I'll share my screen. Can everyone see that okay?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, perfect. So as Paul mentioned, we do have some updated slides in the back end of the show from Compass for budget and schedule purposes, but we met with you guys a couple of weeks ago, and we'll just do a very brief review of the recap of the design to date. And with that, I will kick it over to the site. And we have Eddie Marshall on the line here. And Eddie, if you could just briefly walk us through where we are.
Sure.
On the site.
Thank you, Bill. And this is a slide folks have seen before, but certainly how the playground and that front entry area lays out ties in nicely with the building. I wanted to point out, obviously, where the bus drop-off is, where the parent drop-off is at 4 and 6. And I want to actually jump to number 8 because that's our outdoor learning areas. And I wanted to focus on that because this, on that first 8, that is on the front part of the building is an opportunity for a green roof and a place to be outside. So I think in some of our previous plans, we have not shown this, but this is a nice augmentation to the outdoor courtyard classroom that we have in the middle of the building. And obviously in previous meetings, we've talked about the larger outdoor learning area there on the side of the site. Then just to wrap things up, obviously we have our gardens, we have our park at number 7, we have our parking areas at number 9, and the playground at number 3. Also, just to, I know we talked about the loop road at the last meeting and the best way to have that integrated, and that just is shown there at the back side of the site. And let's move to the site plan. So this is obviously a plan folks have seen, and we really still excited about the way you're going to be entering this site. You know, the buffering to the neighborhood as you first come into the property and move north. You have that loop road that was kind of identified as that number 2. And Bill, if you could just kind of flag everybody for that loop road, and then moving on to some of the community athletic areas. Obviously, we have a really core area right in front of the building, great visibility, great microclimate, ties in with all the other outdoor activities. So we really think that there's going to be really excellent synergy, has a walking path around the entire field complex itself. And then to move on to just to talk to C, which we are flagging those areas for outdoor learning. And again, we have that courtyard in the middle of the building, but then we also have that area that's going to be on the green roof, which we think is going to be great. And then just to go to planting. So I know we did talk about planting in one of the last week's meetings, but for the folks who weren't there, view this as kind of a planting diagram. And we have an attitude that we want to have as many native plants as we can. We have a palette of kind of larger shade trees that is kind of rooted in oak and maple, a good variety of flowering trees, which is a great way to call out spring. All of these plants have very good fall color. And then there'll be a range of both shrubs to provide some buffering to some vehicular traffic. And perennials and grasses are really focused on where the entry areas are. So think places where the kids will be walking or the outdoor classroom. And we really like the idea of kind of how we've layered the landscape and how we've scaled it to different types of use.
Thank you. Thanks, Ed.
Thank you. This is Ken Kovacs from Flansburgh, and I'm going to walk through how does all that site planning that Eddie just showed us happen while the site is occupied. And just everybody's familiar with the site. We have the existing Mendez highlighted in this aerial, Concord Street on the bottom of the slide, and we have Fisk Road on the east side of the slide. Bill, if you could advance it. Yep. So what this looks like is from December of 2021, about 15, 16 months from now, that's when we fence in this entire site, begin to have construction laydown space, and they start working on the foundations. And that activity continues to the end of school in June of 2023. At that point, the existing school will be ready to move in with furniture and the teachers become acclimated. And then next slide, we take down the existing Mendez site. And part of this, I just want to point out, there will be a temporary access road coming from Fisk. And then as you can see, the Mendez school property actually overlaps that road. And one of the advantages we have with working with a construction manager at risk is we can have a lot of upfront early dialogue with how to relate construction activity with respect to the neighbors and the ongoing school activity. Next slide. And on September of 2023, we're working on the play areas and the fields, but the drop-offs for the buses will use that access road Eddie described, and the parents will be able to use their drop-off that loops around, and that's long enough to get all the cars off of Concord Street, and the parking lot will be turned over. Next slide. And then from May 2023 to, September 2023 to May 2024, there'll be ongoing site work, but as you see, the final site will be turned over in the spring of 2024 with the play areas and everything that's functional. So that was just a recap, and we had gone through this at the last Triboard, but just want to show you that again. And now looking at the building, basic building blocks of how we derived at the form of the building and how the program's distributed. Next slide. This is the academic houses. It's based on 3 wings, each wing accommodating a specific grade. And Assistant Superintendent Kyra spoke to this at the last one, and I think we hit all the highlights. Next slide. Look at the floor plan. So on the west side of the site, we've grouped all the community activities from the academic wing. So on an evening event or during a summer program, you're able to lock off those academic wings for supervision and really have a community asset with the gymnasium and the cafeteria at the main entrance. So you're able to really control how the building is used throughout the year for supervision, but also efficiency with the building. So we're able to kind of downshift the rest of the building and only keep what you want on during weekends, after hours, and the summer months. So this is a look at the first floor, and then the second floor. This is primarily the media center, project spaces, an art room, and then the 3 academic wings that cluster around an all-grade common. Next slide. And what we'd like to introduce, so this is new. We added this and just really to get a feel for the school and the scale. And so here is a rendering that shows some texture. Again, we're working with the school building committee and getting input from everybody. And you can see the clock tower element that defines the entry, the gymnasium that's off to the left. But primarily we're using brick. We love using brick. And then just some highlights here and there at the main entry and then on the classroom wings off to the east. But you can see really from a student's perspective, it could be quite nice. Next slide. And we're also looking at different materials. So in the previous one, we were using architectural precast slate. So that's actually a precast concrete panel. So that's at the existing Warren School where the clock is. That's precast panels. And then here is the idea of using a natural material such as slate. And slate's used in a lot of architecture on the for siding. And here is an example of using that. And there could be an economic advantage here because it's a little less expensive than the precast. But this is some of the conversation that we'll have going into the next phase of the project. But as you see, here's a little bit of the life and the character from a student's perspective. Next slide. And as Eddie Marshall from Simpson Studio described the outdoor classrooms to the east side, here's a look back at the building. And you can see that we have brick buildings that are highlighted with some wood accents in the distance. And then again, we have some architectural precast material. Next slide. And then what's this look like if we look at something like slate, a little more natural, a little more textural. And again, this is part of the ongoing process we'll have to define what this building looks and feels like. But for the purposes of this being submitted to the Massachusetts School Building Authority and building a budget, we feel that we have some great materials that have been tested on public schools that allow us to have this conversation when the project commences after a successful town vote. Next slide. Now Bill's going to walk us through some of the MEP systems.
Thanks, Kent. So looking at starting off with the HVAC, we're using a geotherm system for our primary heating and cooling source. This involves ground source water heat to heat pumps for hot and chilled water. Our current design utilizes 42 geothermal wells, and this has been designed to handle the primary load of the building and about 50 to 60% of the peak load. For those rare times or a couple of times during the year where we need more heat or cooling, we will be supplementing the heating with a gas-fired boiler, and the cooling tower will be used for supplemental heat rejection. Hot water, chilled water is distributed throughout the building to air handling units, VAV boxes, fan coil units, and cabinet unit heaters. Looking at geotherm, basic parameters of the geotherm system. Basically, for a geotherm system, you are taking advantage of the stable ground temperatures. So you are drawing heat from the ground in the winter and you're rejecting heat in the summer. As the water loops around and goes, through underground, it utilizes the mass of the earth to either preheat or pre-cool the water. We have completed a test well on the site, so our design is based upon the hard test data from that test well. Looking at the electrical systems, there will be a new service from the utility to an exterior pad-mounted transformer for a new 480 volt service coming into the building. Currently, we're specifying metering and sub-meterings for our lead point. And what this does is it helps the building understand and track its energy use. Backup power will be provided by a natural gas-fired generator. The building will either have PVs or be designed to accept them in the future. On the plumbing side of things, there'll be a new domestic water service. The domestic hot water will utilize the geotherm system, like I said earlier. We'll have new sanitary waste and storm drainage systems, and of course, all low flow fixtures. And finally, looking at fire protection, the building will be fully sprinkled. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris Schaffner from the Green Engineers to kind of just highlight some of our sustainable features.
Yeah, again, no new information here. I think most of you have probably heard and seen this slide before, but the basic story that we want to remind you of is that the MSBA has specific sustainable design requirements to be LEED certified and be better than the energy code, but the town of Ashland has aspirations far beyond those minimum requirements. So the current design is going to be meeting and exceeding all the MSBA requirements and all the code requirements. In addition, we've created a facility that is going to be net zero ready And we do that through reducing loads by super insulating the building envelope and using exterior sunshades to reduce our peak heat gain and our cooling loads. And then we handle the loads in the building with the geothermal heat pump system. So while that doesn't handle the full load, it handles almost all of the hours of actual operation. The gas heat will be there for emergency conditions and for warming up the building after Christmas break or something like that. And then it's designed to be solar ready. So if we're a net zero ready building, we have adequate space available and structure to allow photovoltaics on the building, or potentially you could incorporate these into the project as the design and construction proceeds and get to that net zero immediately. We've done some detailed analysis of the project using energy modeling, and we're tracking an EUI, or Energy Utilization Index, of 24.5 kBtu per square foot per year. Our aspirational goal was 25, so we're below that, which means we're also able to fit into Eversource's net zero energy buildings program that they've newly rolled out. Beyond that, of course, all the other aspects of sustainability that we care about, healthy materials, a good indoor environment, and especially a good learning environment with good air, good light, good acoustics are all part of this design.
Perfect. Thank you. And then, Paul, I don't know if you want to run this or.
Well, so we ran this same animation at the last meeting. I'll leave it up to Lori, John, and Yolanda if you think it's valuable to show the animation again. It's the same one that we had last Triboard.
Yeah.
Does anyone on the select board feel like they need to see this again? It's the same one we saw, where it basically takes you around the building. I'm not hearing any takers. I think from our perspective, we're good.
Right. Yeah. So we'll move on, Bill.
Move on. Perfect. Thank you. So Jeff, if you want to walk us through schedule.
Yeah, if you want to go to the title slide, or
yep.
Yeah, right there. Perfect.
Yep.
So I'm Jeff D'Amico, the owner's project manager from Compass. Tonight we're going to talk about the new information, some of it new, some of it stuff you've seen before, but I will focus on schedule, budget, MSBA reimbursement, things that affect that in terms of exclusions and the overall MSBA program, talk about fundamental cost drivers, and the next steps with the overall funding approval process. So we'll start with the zoom out of schedule. So right here you have kind of a simplistic timeline which shows that effectively from now until when you open your new building and demolish it, there's essentially 4 years of this project that will be in this partnership together. After that point, there's about another year worth of closeout that Compass will partner with the building committee to bring it through to the final audit with the MSBA. So essentially there's a 4 to 5 year horizon total for our relationship as we move through these various steps. How that breaks down is that the design and permitting will effectively take a year, kicking off in December after you fund the project, and then bringing you through permitting and bidding in the fall of 21. We're anticipating using a construction manager delivery method where we would have an early bid package in the fall of 21 and then have a 21-month construction phase in order to open the building for summer of 23, at which point we would be able to move into the new building and out of the old building and start the abatement and demolition process, which will take approximately 3 months for a building of this size. With a concurrent site work package would essentially, once you hit the winter, we assume we'd have to come back for the spring, do some final landscaping, essentially equates to about 11 months. Now the next slide focuses on those big bullets that I just noted about the overall when we're kicking off design and when we go to bid. So just kind of distilling the information we just reviewed. I'm gonna go to the next slide, Bill. So budget and reimbursement, where do we go from here? Slide. So the overall budget that we're proposed and we've reviewed with the building committee, they've approved at their meeting last week, is $83,387 in addition to the $1 million that was already funded as part of the feasibility study. How that breaks down into several big categories. First and foremost is the building construction, as well as all markups, overhead of the contractor, and the demolition costs. The big number at the top of $55 million. The other thing to note on this particular site is it's a large site. And so that is one of the items we'll talk about a little bit in terms of cost drivers. That equates to about $12.5 million on the overall construction cost of the project. Those first two numbers are what we allude to as hard costs. That would be the bid that the contractor would submit and actually construct the building for. The remaining items are what we call soft costs. And so those are technology or equipment and consultant fees and other contingencies. That breaks down to the furniture, equipment, and technologies is broken into two buckets, furniture, fixtures, and then technology. That's about 2.1 million. The overall design and all the consultant fees equate to about $6.7 million worth of cost. The owner's project manager, myself, my team, as well as the on-site dedicated person we have filling the role of clerk of the works is 2.1 million. And then all the other various smaller line items roll up to a $1.1 million number. And lastly, it's important to note that we're approving a not to exceed number, and that's what's going back to the MSBA and to your voters in town. And so that has various contingencies with them. First, hard cost contingency to deal with any unforeseen conditions with construction. And that's the majority of that $3 million, and then about another 600,000 in soft cost contingencies for other ancillary costs that would affect consultant or scope changes from the project itself. All that rolls into the $83.4 million number. And when you add in the previous $1 million, it's a total project budget of $84.4 million. The MSBA grant program, which we'll talk about in the subsequent slides, we're anticipating based on where this project lands to their various caps to be about $26.5 to $27.5 million in terms of reimbursement to come back to you. And that's subject to the MSBA's review of the package that you're approving tonight that will go into them next week for submission. And they'll come back before you bring it back to the town voters, locking in the details of the final deal and funding agreement. Next slide. So what does that mean? There's two types of reimbursements. There's the reimbursement that the town receives through the MSBA, and then there's what we call the effective reimbursement rate. It's important to note that on the subsequent slides here, you'll see the various caps that the MSBA has built into the process. And so there's an effective reimbursement rate. So the effective reimbursement rate ends up being about a third of the overall total project cost. And I'll delve into that in the next slide in a second. But your specific reimbursement rate is built on your socioeconomic and demographic point system as created by the MSBA. And that's a 52.26% assigned to the town. That's annually updated, but barely changes except by a tenth here or there as they kind of update throughout the entire system. So that's what's been assigned to the town of Ashland. There is incentives for energy efficiency to get a LEED or Mass CHIPS certification, and that's 2 percentage points, which we're planning to achieve. Lastly, they rate each and every town based on your maintenance of your existing infrastructure to encourage towns to be good stewards of their property. That's a rating score between 0 and 2%, and the rating they've assigned to Ashland is 1.31. So that rolls up to a total of 55.57 of all eligible costs prior to exclusions. And so the other bullet here in blue notes that the effective cost is actually derived and dependent on how much of the overall not to exceed budget you spend, what your favorable bid results are when bids come in hand, and any changes you make along the way that may be deemed ineligible due to being outside of the scope of the initial budget agreement with the state. Next slide. So what does that mean to the overall MSBA process? The big driver there and what transitions any project within the MSBA pipeline from the 55% in your case down to that roughly a third is that the building costs exceed the MSBA's cap at $333 a square foot. There are no buildings in the MSBA pipeline that are being built for $333 at this time. They update that on a periodic basis and have not updated it in over 2 years. So to demonstrate that, so that jobs that are in your shoes 2 years ago were that much closer to the MSBA cap than we are today. We don't foresee them updating it anytime soon with some of the other issues going on globally and worldwide. So that's the number that is being currently tracked with the MSBA. They also have a site cap at 8%, and that's 8% of the total building cost. And so the reason they do that is to try and be equal and spread the money around the Commonwealth for towns that are in an urban environment with very little site compared to towns that are in a suburban that may have a sprawling site. And so all projects hit that 8% essentially when you get out of the building footprint. Lastly, in terms of the caps that we're actually hitting here is the furniture and technology. Each of those is capped at $1,200 per student contribution from the MSBA. And that's multiplied by your enrollment, which in this case for the 3 grades is 635 students. The proposed budget includes $1,700 for furnishings and $1,550 per student for technology. Those are about in the middle of the span of all other projects that go within the MSBA pipeline. So you're in the sweet spot in terms of investment of overall equipment as relates to other projects in the pipeline. Things that this project is below. There's an overall cap on total soft costs exceeding 20%. We did not hit that. The OPM costs exceeding 3.5%. The project is below that, as well as designer costs exceeding 10%. We're below that as well. Lastly, change orders. The MSBA caps change orders at 1%. And that'll be determined based on the actual change orders you guys authorize, the building committee that is, when we actually build the building. 1% is never enough money to actually carry within your overall project budget. As I noted in the earlier slide, we're carrying about $2.9 million in construction contingency. So that equates to 4.3%. And that's a very healthy and reasonable number, especially going with a construction manager delivery approach. If you were to go with a general contractor, it would be a higher percentage that would be reflected there. But 1% is the amount that the MSBA reimburse up to for all eligible costs. Things that aren't eligible, site costs that exceed the 8%, owner change orders, third-party requests from building inspectors, those are things that are deemed as ineligible. Items that are deemed eligible are essentially errors and omission from the design team or unforeseen conditions in the building itself. Those are the items that would be deemed eligible as it relates to change orders. Next slide. Things to note in terms of actual specific to your project, things that are outside their program, but the MSBA allows. And so that the existing gymnasium at the current school is 8,000 square feet. And so the building committee is chosen to match that in terms of the existing square footage to the current proposed square footage to obtain bleachers and maximum use of that gymnasium. The way the MSBA identifies that is simplistic math. They take the net square footage of 2,000 and multiply that by their grossing factor, and ultimately they'll deduct about 3,000 square feet from your eligible dollars multiplied by that 333. Same applies to the extended day program. Their program supports educational programs for the school itself. They allow extended day, and we've done that in many other projects, but that net square footage ends up being ineligible multiplied by the grossing factor. There are other things that are necessary as part of the overall program that the MSBA notes are not part of the core program, but allowed to be absorbed within the grossing factor, such as an additional bathroom in the nurse suite or the mother's nursing room that are requirements ultimately for the project to move forward. The MSBA allows that to absorb that within the grossing factor. Lastly, the important thing to note in the MINDES is there was a previous project that you partnered with the MSBA. And so with all previous partnerships with the MSBA, they want to make sure that the investment had its full useful life completed. And so if the building is removed premature to the 20-year lifespan of the roof, they'll take a prorated portion of their contribution off the new contribution they're making as part of this overall project. So that's a to be determined cost. It could be as high as $350,000 based on the straight math of talking with Jim and Barbara at the school department of where they think that might land. But we're going to submit this to the state and see what they come back with an overall cost, and we'll enter that into the overall total project budget. But for tonight's purposes in that estimated reimbursement, I've assumed that kind of higher spectrum of the $350,000 potential that was discussed with the school department. Next slide. Site-specific costs. So your building itself lands reasonably with all other school building costs within the MSBA project, but there are a couple of unique things about your particular project. I noted the size of the site. So at over 16 acres, it's a rather large site. You're doing a build behind, which necessitates a longer roadways and parking connections to that building because of how deep it is on the site, and also replacement of the ball fields. And so those are driving some of the site costs, as well as the geothermal wells that you're investing in. In addition to geothermal, there's other net zero factors that are important that the town is pursuing and that all net zero projects are pursuing. And that's added insulation in the roof and walls and floor, as well as triple pane glazing to try and make sure you're thermally holding in the efficiency of the building that you're designing to improve operational costs. Next slide. Where we go from here, tonight with a successful vote of the Triboard, we'll be wrapping up the additional steps needed to complete the MSBA's requirements, and then we'll meet back with the school building committee on September 3rd, at which point they'll vote to submit the actual schematic design submission. They've already made their vote on the total project scope and budget, which you're seeing tonight. With there, we'll submit it to the state on September 9th, which is a hard deadline that needs to be met to meet within the overall MSBA cycle to get in front of their board vote for late October. And from there, the next step that the town will do is after your funding vote and the MSBA's vote, you would execute the project scope and budget agreement, which essentially locks in the terms of the deal with the overall cost, schedule, and reimbursement rate. Slide. And then lastly, how the project gets funded and approved in terms of the 3 remaining milestones after this week. And that is the MSBA will take it up at their board vote on October 28th. We'll have a back and forth with the staff in between to understand exactly what the final details are of the overall agreement. They'll vote to approve your budget, and then we'll bring it back to the voters. First, potentially there'll be a town meeting that would have a townwide vote, and then there's also a townwide election. And I think we're targeting November and December, but obviously, given the global issues, those things may switch in the final. So we're showing that as a November, December timeframe. So with that, that includes our high-level overview of the total scope and budget. Scope you've seen before, cost is new tonight. We're happy to take any and all questions that you may have. I'm going to turn it back over to Paul to open it up. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So I don't know if you want to just open it up to all three boards, but happy to have the team answer any questions. We sent out some, and Jeff, we did send out backup. They have the eye chart, detailed budget spreadsheet, along with some other information. But if we need more information on anything, we have a couple of other backup slides that we can present should the need arise. So.
Maybe
Jonathan Moore, Vice Chair from Finance Committee. Just a question on the potential expansion that could be built. If that was, and pardon me if this was mentioned, but if that was necessary, what would be looking at for a price tag on that?
So in terms of you're referring to the building footprint that Flansburgh has identified. As part of the MSBA process, they want to know that there's always an option for a building, understanding enrollments rise and fall over the decades. And so we've identified a footprint that we're keeping utilities out of so that you can have kind of a clear building pad, which is off to the right of the site, essentially where that outdoor classroom is, as a natural extension that works around that hub of the learning common. We're not pricing that up at this point because we don't know what point in time you would need that. We're not envisioning an enrollment bubble beyond the 635 enrollment that you have approved as part of the agreement with the state. Hope that answers your question.
It does. Just a follow up. Hypothetically, if it needed to be built today, just based on what we know about these other academic wings, just a sense of the cost in today's dollars.
So Kent, what is are those about 8,000
square feet per floor? Yeah.
Yeah, so about 16,000 square feet times the 643 or whatever per square foot is would be, a very crude estimation.
Yeah, the overall cost would be a lot less than that. That comes up to $9.5 million or so. The overall cost would be a lot less in terms of you wouldn't have all the infrastructure of the utilities you're bringing into the site. You would not need the ball fields and the earthwork and all those other site costs. So it'd really just be the building cost itself. And so that would be rough math here. More in the 6.5 kind of million range of the building itself, because that's where the investment would be. You have the capacity to support that. And you may have some additional parking that may be needed to support those new teachers. So there may be some level of site work, but you would not need the overall site work cost and markup that's included in this particular option.
Great, thank you.
Well, Paul, I had a question. Just going back at the budget, that administrative costs are a little over $1 million. Can you just give us some examples of what's in there?
Yep, absolutely. So commissioning, so the MSBA pays for all your commissioning for the project, but they do a basic services commissioning. So your building envelope and your MEP. Projects that are going net zero ready, we would want to have some enhanced commissioning. So we've parking lot at about $120,000 addition for that as a particular line item to make sure the investment has been realized and that we have the right building for enhanced commissioning. Also, there's the construction manager's pre-construction fee, which is about $200,000 of that. Other things that are in there are rebates and energy back charges, rather, company about $200,000 for that. Your moving expenses and the cost to remove the furniture from the existing building. That could either be recycled through a third-party vendor or brought to a dumpster. A decision for or later on. We've been going the recycling route in other towns where they actually surplus it. It still costs money to work all those logistics, but it does not send things to a landfill, which is another goal the MSBA is promoting and all of us are trying to do to not waste existing infrastructure that can be repurposed to third parties, whether a charter school, parochial school, or actually in the island nations surrounding the country. We've shipped stuff overseas as well.
So this is kind of collection of miscellaneous costs. Does it have any of the owner's costs in there? The owner being the town?
Yeah, so the builder's risk insurance is in there. Other things are testing and inspection. So various third-party inspections of the soil verification or other consultants you would bring on. So things that don't fall under either the designer or us are kind of in that $1.1 million.
All right, so that includes items the town will pay for, but will be reimbursed through this process for.
Correct. The only item that's not reimbursable, the moving costs and the demolition of the furniture, those are the two that are ineligible. There's also some permitting costs in there. So we understand and believe the town's going to waive the building permit, but there's still inherent cost of the various permitting boards in town, hiring a third-party civil engineer to do a peer review, or the plumbing and electrical inspector, kind of an as-needed service. So there may be some minor inspection fees there related. And the state also requires a structural peer review. Although it's not required per code anymore, it's still required as part of the MSBA process. So those are the things that are rolled into that number.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question regarding the effective reimbursement number that you were quoting, the 32 to 35%. I know you were talking about some of the cost drivers of the project, and I was curious on like other projects that are in the pipeline and how that effective reimbursement percentage kind of falls. Is that generally higher or lower than other towns and other projects that you've seen? I'm just trying to gauge sort of where Ashland is in the range.
It's an excellent question and a growing gap. I would say that, the MSBA, when they reconstituted about 12 years ago, had established that cost per square foot cap at $287. Now, 12 years ago, we were building buildings for $300 a square foot. So the gap was very small. And each year, the cost of escalation and market conditions and materials continue to grow and outpace the rate at which the MSBA. So it's a projection because you only know at the end of the project. And so the jobs that are completed and have that actual number were jobs that were approved 5 years ago. And so the growth and outpace of current construction projects has dramatically separated that gap. And even jobs that were approved 2 years ago that are 2 years in front of you were at the same $333 that you are at today. And those jobs are still 2 years away from getting their final audits. So it's a growing cost. Certainly there's cost premiums on this job in the sense that we have a larger site, we have geothermal, and we are going net zero. So we are spreading ourselves a little bit higher than some of the other current projects, but we are in line with other jobs that are pursuing net zero ready. Compass is involved in several other net zero ready projects that are in this 600 plus range for dollars per square foot that are being expended.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
And Brandy, I can share with you a link to the MSBA's website that has a cost. It hasn't been updated since January. That has all these different projects. And if you choose ones that are, in our kind of time frame that are still not completed as of that point, they all tend to be, 500 plus per square foot. And that includes ones that aren't net zero ready or anything like that. So.
Okay, that'd be great. Thanks, Paul.
Paul, to Mark, do you mind if I ask a question? I'm sorry,
Yes.
Ryan. I wonder if it sounds like there are a number of add-ons we're putting on, like Net Zero Ready and others that obviously are costing money up front, but I wonder if anybody could speak to the long-term savings that we could expect to see from that investment.
Kent, do you or Chris want to take that one, or?
Yeah, I know early on there was some rough estimates, but I don't know if Chris is on, whether that was part of the last report or not.
Well, we did some life cycle costing of the different options. And so what we found was that we were coming in comparable to the base option in terms of the life cycle cost. Basically, we were spending a little bit more money up front, primarily on the building envelope and on the geothermal system, with the result that the operational savings would be there so that it would balance out. I don't recall the exact numbers that we had, but we certainly could share that report again. Keeping in mind, as you noted, that was a preliminary study that led us to the path of the proposed systems that are there now. But in general, we would expect that that's largely a break even when we don't include the solar into that equation.
Thank you.
Yeah, and when we do, and I'll try to get that more information for you, Mark, and I'll probably try to put it in terms of energy use. And the reason I say that is I think people would be surprised at how well we're doing from a cost perspective right now because of our power purchase agreements that we've signed. So our current utility costs are lower than they might have been without those agreements we have. So it won't be as startling of cost difference, and that's because of those power purchase agreements we have.
If I could just add one more piece, Paul, we did also life cycle a full geothermal system versus the hybrid system that's currently proposed. And that option came in significantly more expensive from both the first cost and the life cycle cost. So I think we have gotten to a system that is optimized life cycle cost considering the environmental impact.
There are two other costs I'd like to note here too. So the total project budget as presented here does not include the cost of the photovoltaic array on the roof or in the parking lots. It does include the infrastructure to handle it in terms of structurally making sure the roof can handle photovoltaics and maximizing the amount of spaces where you could put it by consolidating the rooftop equipment. It also would have conduits out to the parking lot for future tie-in location for photovoltaics. We understand that you also have your public safety building project in town, as well as other assets that may make sense to bundle together with an overall project and get it for a much better buy than doing an individual photovoltaic array. So the current cost as presented here includes geothermal and all the other net zero components, but does not include a photovoltaic array on the roof or the parking lot.
Can I just add, Paul, just one thing on Mark, I think brought up a very important point, because having some hard numbers on the operational savings, I think is going to be important for the public discussion of this project. So I think it's important to have some strong information to present to the residents.
Yep, totally agree.
One other item to note in terms of reimbursement, this does not include the numbers presented. You don't show the rebate incentive potentials from Eversource, which can range from 120,000 to 225,000, and so that would be on top of the rebates from the MSBA. And so they have multiple programs there. The first one, which is their standard program, which equates to about $100,000 worth of rebate, and then they have a new program for low energy intensive projects that could get up to 225,000, which is brand new and something we're exploring. But the 100,000 is a safe number, and the 225,000 is a number we're exploring based on their brand new program.
Well, I have a question, if you don't mind.
Yep.
Thank you. Jeff, I think this would be directed towards you. Paul had provided us a lot of information to go over this past weekend, and I was going through everything, and I was looking at all the materials that need to be, you know, purchased and added into this building. And one of the things that caught my concern was that there were 11 bathrooms that just said, you know, water closets, and then it said ADA compliant water closets. Why wouldn't they all be ADA compliant water closets instead of just 18 and not the total package? That just caught my eye and I don't know why that would be like that.
I'll speak to that. I'd have to go into the drawings and look at the specific number, but this is Kent from Flansburgh. So within the gang toilets, we're required to have certain ADA accessible toilets, but all the sinks obviously will be ADA accessible. So there is a mix. So there'd be a standard toilet and then an ADA accessible toilet stall. Within all the individual bathrooms that are distributed throughout for either teacher or individual student use, those are all ADA compliant. But when it comes to the larger gang toilets, they're not all ADA accessible. There is what's required by code that's accessible, because a stall is much larger than an ADA accessible stall is much larger than a non-ADA compliant stall.
Right. That's what caught my concern about that. And I just wanted to make sure that we don't get stuck with respect to that.
Nope. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Appreciate that.
Paul, I have a couple questions.
Sure.
If I could. Thanks. So thanks for the overview here. It's there's a lot of information. I did just pull up the eye chart that Paul referred to. My questions are around this the green line, the MSBA maximum total facilities grant. The eye chart version of this shows a number that's probably smack in the middle there, and it looks like it hovers around 32%, 31, 32%. What are the, you know, how do we gain that extra 2 or 3%? Because in a project this large, you know, it's $1 million to $2.5 million. So just curious if there are ways that, you know, kind of push us up a little bit more in the reimbursement range.
Right. And so I'll start and I'll let Jeff fill in the details. So it's kind of goes back to what Jeff had mentioned. What we're really talking about is a not to exceed project budget. So in there is inherent contingencies. There's so many things here that if we don't spend them, we get that savings. So it's because we're over these caps, there's so much of these construction costs and soft costs that are, when we go through them, if we don't need to spend those contingencies, that ups that reimbursement. There's also value engineering we'll be doing along the way, where we'll be analyzing, hey, you know, we've already started putting together a list of, you know, the generator. Right now we're carrying a natural gas generator as opposed to a diesel. The diesel can save us some money. Okay, do we want to go down that route? Do we want to not use, say, pavers for the outdoor learning space to the east? We can go with potentially some concrete and, you know, save some money there. So along the way, there's lots of opportunities for us to make decisions that reduce that cost, and that's what can get us up to that 35% range. So what I want everybody to leave with is this is the not to exceed budget, and our goal is to beat this. Hopefully beat it by a lot, but beat it.
Okay, I mean, I'm in favor of pavers. I mean, one thing that we can't lose sight of is this building's going to be with us for a really long time, right? So I think it'd be important to build it right. But I appreciate the not to exceed limit, and thanks for the clarifications there. Is the roof replacement reimbursement or take, I don't know what the appropriate terminology here is, Jeff, but you mentioned maybe $350,000 in estimate. Is that factored into these costs already in the MSBA facilities grant? Is that already removed?
Yeah, so they call it a cost recovery, but It's reflected in that 26, 26 and a half to 27 and a half range.
Okay, that probably accounts for the difference in my math. So thanks. I did have one more question, and it's really kind of not super related to this project immediately, but are there income opportunities when the current facility is deconstructed that would factor back into income for the town? And I'm thinking, broad stroking, like recyclable materials or materials that can be sold for other construction, or is that just a total loss?
That would inherently be baked in the overall construction cost itself. Yep. Because you have to abate the building, it's hard to dissect, remove some of the asbestos floor tile and some of those other older items that are hidden behind the wall. So you want to bid it as a complete package so that that contractor is responsible for getting rid of whatever hazardous materials are latent within the building itself and then demolishing it in its entirety. So there's not a lot of opportunities for things like that.
Okay, thanks. And then, for a future conversation, because that's a couple of years out, but there may be some it's an old building with a lot of history in Ashland. So there may be some people that are interested in safe pieces of it, not asbestos-free pieces of that building. So again, maybe a few years down the line, the parquet floor or something that comes out, maybe there's some opportunities to do some unique things.
Ryan, this is Yolanda. Yeah, I've already mentioned that to a few people. I think, as you said, there's a lot of history in that building, and there might be people who are interested in giving us some funds to help purchase that. So certainly something we'll be looking at on the building committee.
Thanks, Yolanda.
Yep.
Paul, it's Erin. I have a question.
Sure.
And it kind of goes back to the bathroom question, but do we have any gender neutral student bathrooms that are laid out, or single stall bathrooms?
Yes, and that's why they're not designated quite yet, but we're putting placeholders to make sure we have some gender neutral distributed throughout the plan. And so in the next phase, we'll identify which ones are teacher related and which ones are student related, because they'll have different heights for the toilets and the sinks, et cetera, per code. But yes, it's been part of the conversation, and we're making sure that it's built in.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other thoughts, questions? So one of the things that has come up a couple of times at the public forums, and so just wanted to share. So one of the differences between this kind of expenditure by the town and some of the ones that a lot of the voters are used to, maybe we're purchasing the Valentine property or purchasing properties where we vote on a debt exclusion and say that debt exclusion is $5 million. And then we immediately borrow that amount of money, and therefore those debt services hit the taxpayers that next round. Something to think about here, because we get this a lot, that, well, things are tough right now for people, and we definitely think that's very important, and we want to be sensitive to that. But the way this works is we vote this, and then the costs are throughout the next 3 years. And so we would be borrowing only what is needed for sustaining the cash flow of the project at the right times. So this wouldn't hit right away. So over the next year, we might, only need, $6 million over that period, because we only pay for the work that's done. Also, the reimbursement, the way it works now, as opposed to, say, when the high school was built, is that it's an ongoing reimbursement, roughly about 60 days in arrears, where we get invoiced, we pay the invoice, and then we submit to the MSBA for reimbursement, and then they'll reimburse 30 to 45 days after they get that. We've been doing that throughout the feasibility. So that's how this will lay out, that the true or meaningful or larger impact to the taxpayer will be in future fiscal years. It won't be next fiscal year. It'll be incremental, it'll rev up, kind of peaking towards the middle to the latter part of the project. So I think that's something also to be able to, speak with people about that. Hey, if you approve this, even if we think we're only going to borrow $56 million, we're not borrowing $56 million January 1. So that won't impact the tax bills that quickly.
Well, Mark, can I ask you another question kind of related to that? And
yep.
Forgive me if this was covered in the last Triboard because I wasn't able to make it, but do we have projections on sort of how this fits into the overall tax structure of the town and what tax rates look like? I remember conversations some time ago where we were hoping that with other projects coming offline, there would, in effect, we wouldn't feel the full brunt of this project. We also talked about it to some degree in line with the public safety project. And maybe if somebody's able to just refresh my memory on sort of, when we're asking taxpayers to pay, how much more is it really going to feel like?
Yeah.
I think I can speak to that.
So I have a couple of slides that I can share. One is a cash flow slide, and then Michael put together, an estimate for tax impact and when it might be. And I'll give you the basis for that. Right now, he was operating on making some big assumptions because we're just coming up with the cash flow, so it's difficult to get details. So let me share this.
Let me stop sharing.
I can kick you off. Don't worry about it.
Oh, okay.
All right. So I will go to full screen. Everybody see this? Okay.
Yeah.
Let me just put this. There we go. So what this is just a graph that kind of outlines over the course of the project what we think the cash flow might be. Now, this is a first draft done just the other day by Compass. So this might change slightly based on when we bring CM on and the different things and when they might hit. So this kind of shows you that initially we don't have a lot of cash flow needs. As you get into the later part of 21 and then going into 22, that's when we start having to pay more for the materials and the construction costs and things like that. And then you see that it ramps down as the project goes. So because of this, the town doesn't need to borrow all of it at once. And again, if we get here and to these spots here and we've spent a certain amount of money, we're also submitting as we go the reimbursement. And the way that it works is the MSB doesn't try to spread out, if you will, their reimbursement. So as we do the reimbursement, they will be providing us our reimbursement kind of front loaded until we reach that dollar, until we get close to reaching that dollar cap for a particular category, whether it's site cost or whatever. So if our site costs are capped at $3 million, when we get up to about 95% of that reimbursement, that's when they'll stop that reimbursement. So a lot of our reimbursement will come on the earlier side as well. But this just shows you that this is what the cash flow is going to ramp up. And what that means, and again, this is, why didn't that switch? There we go. This is a graphic that Michael put together for us. And again, at the bottom, this is, he took a swag at this even before getting the cash flow. But what is true here is you can see those debt services that are currently on the average tax bill going down over the next few years. And then you see the ramp up of the costs for the debt services for this project ramping up along those lines as well. So I believe Michael, did an estimate of borrowing $6 million the first year, $25 million, and then $25 million. Now, again, this is for demonstration purposes. As we get more detailed into the cash flow, we can better work out what those needs are for borrowing. But for answering that question, Mark, and kind of as a visual for how this impacts tax bills, you can see that for the next couple of fiscal years, it's not a substantial hit on a tax bill, but then it ramps up as we have to borrow the remaining share of our project.
So Paul, just one follow-up to that. The number that kicks in at FY25, setting aside the dip in the other excluded projects, that 437.05, I know it's not going to be that final number, but that would be the number we'd be paying for the building for the remaining term of the financing.
Roughly, yes. So that's kind of in line with a similar number that we provided the MSBA just as part of the PSR. They asked for what the tax impact would be, and that was around the number. So this is the assumptions made were borrowing about 56 million over those 3 years that I described. And Michael, certainly chime in if I got any of the factors wrong.
No, you're good.
So, and then obviously they had a similar graphic, and that's where I had Michael, and that's why I asked Michael for it, because I thought it was a really great graphic they had for the public safety building. So, that obviously isn't included in this particular slide, but so hopefully that gave some more clarity on that, Mark.
Yes, thank you, Paul.
Hey, Paul, this is Ashwini. I have a question.
Sure.
I had a question on the slide of the floor plan that you guys showed earlier.
Sure.
Can you go to that?
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, so.
I have it available if you want me to just bring it up, Bill.
It's up to you, whichever is easier.
Yeah, I'll just share my screen. There you go. So it was this one here, or this is the first floor?
Yes, that's the one. Yeah, thank you. All right. So the commons area that I see over here, does it show like a staircase over there? Is that what it is?
Yes.
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay. So does that mean we have a second floor to this building?
Yes.
Yes. The following slide.
The following slide. Oh, okay. So that's the one I didn't see. Okay. I had a question. Yeah, I didn't see this slide earlier. So I had a question regarding the theater that we had over there. Are we not going to have a theater in this new Mendes building?
No. Let me. So what the MSBA supports in the elementary schools is a stage, 1,000-foot stage that we can equip with proper theatrical equipment and lighting, etc., and a very large, generous cafeteria. And so there will not be a standalone theater like the existing Mendes school that started as a high school, but they do support the stage with elevator access. And so you can see the grouping. We have practice rooms, music ensemble, 2 music rooms. So typically the music room will act as kind of your kind of back of house turn of performance. And then we will have an elevator that'll have a stop to get to the stage because the stage is elevated, and as well as a stair for access. And so it really will be equipped properly for theatrical productions.
And the cafeteria dining, there is the bars in between that they show over there. Is it something like you can open it up if at all that area is going to be used like the stage for any performances for the school? Yeah, that part, is that something that you can open up?
Those are riser stairs.
Those are riser steps. Yeah. Okay.
And that's the proscenium opening that aligns with those stairs.
Okay.
So that will be open. That's one large space, if you will.
Okay. Oh, okay. All right. Yep. Thank you.
Yep. Sure. Yeah. The interesting thing is they don't support the auditorium, but this is more these music rooms are more space than we currently have. We had to give up some of the space we were using for band at Mendes. So, but these spaces are part of the MSBA template. So they're fully eligible.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Sure. Any other thoughts, questions?
Okay, so from the select board, we have determined that we're going to take this to our select board meeting on Wednesday so that we can just have a further discussion, or if there's public that is not sitting here at this meeting could potentially ask questions. I said, you know, I just felt that was a good way for us to handle it, so we could possibly have more public viewing our discussion as well as it here at the Triboard meeting.
Yeah, and Yolanda, you said you didn't need any of the consultants there, right?
No, unless anyone, but from what I could, from talking to my members, they felt that they had enough they had enough answers and enough information, and tonight was their opportunity if they had any more detailed questions. And then the real number we'll let's look at is the vote to not to exceed number, and if there's any other questions on that, and then discussion of potentially how to manage the debt.
Yeah, and I'll certainly be there and have all the slides and stuff if anybody has any questions.
Great.
Paul, do you see any reason why the school committee can't move forward with a motion and a vote this evening?
Unless you're planning on meeting before we need to, you know, wrap this up. We need to vote from you before Thursday when when the SBC is going to approve the submission. So yeah. unless we're gonna have emergency meeting not posted in time, I would say we need to vote tonight.
I can't think of any reason why that would be necessary, but I did just want to double check with you. I'm happy to make a motion here, but I want to make sure that that's the plan.
Yeah, and certainly particularly if we're making, we're having a vote, any school committee members having any additional questions, but by all means.
Okay, do any school committee members have any other additional questions or comments? Concerns?
I'm good, Lori.
Okay, so if you guys are ready for a motion, I move that we approve the schematic design, scope of a new construction replacement of the David Mendez Elementary School for grades 3 to 5, as presented with a budget not to exceed the total project budget of $84,387,000.
Second.
Second.
And then all in favor, Paul Kendall?
Aye.
Mark Terry?
Aye.
Aaron Williams?
Aye.
Kathy Bates?
Aye.
And it's an aye for me as well. So that passes unanimously for school committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
I see a thumbs up out there. Thank you.
And
very exciting.
And John, it's totally up to the finance committee. We've in the past included FinCom, you know, and we're fine if you do or don't want to, you know, have a vote. MSB doesn't require it, so we're not, you know, necessarily asking, but we're fine if you do. We appreciate any support.
Yeah, sure. I'll entertain a motion to support the school committee's approval.
So moved.
A second.
All right. Ashwini?
Yep.
Scott? Oh, Scott's not here. Pardon me. Ryan?
Aye.
Didn't hear you, Ryan.
Sorry. Yes.
Okay. Jennifer?
Aye.
Jack?
Yes.
Ed?
Yes.
And myself, aye.
So, and just to clarify, Laura, I think a couple of people just texted me saying, you might have said 1,000, but we were so clearly talking, the motion was
84,387,000.
Yeah, so just to make sure that was the motion everybody voted on.
We got to get it right.
So that's all we had. By all means, to Kathy's question at our last tri-board, no time's a bad time for feedback. You don't, whether it be substantive to the numbers, whether it be, hey, I liked watercolor A, not watercolor B, don't like this, by all means, shoot us an email. The earlier we get all the feedback, the better. I'm looking at it. The only person I see on that is not part of the tri-board or a consultant is one of our building committee members. So I don't know if we'll make him a co-host in case he wants to chime in. I'd like to give them an opportunity. I don't know, Chris, if you did have anything to add, or whether you're just along to monitor. So. Sorry, Chris, it was, you were on as well. So both Chris's are on, but both Chris Lee and Chris Matthew. So.
Sorry, yep, nope, I'm just here to listen and support.
Great.
I'm just here to observe as well. Thanks.
And just I want to reiterate again just thank the building committee for all their work. We've had some really great meetings. I think one of our best ones was our last one. We had a really great conversation about the budget and how to move forward and being very, very diligent and with the spaces we're choosing and how we're going forward. So to your point, Ryan, I think we're in pretty good shape, and we're keeping an eye on doing it right, but as efficiently as possible. So.
Much appreciation for everybody on the building committee. Thank you.
Agreed.
Yeah, it's been a really good group.
Yeah, we're very fortunate. We have a lot of expertise, both professionally, a lot of great educators on there. So really, really ticking all the boxes. So it's really great.
Clearly.
Yeah, thanks for all that work. It's a lot of work.
All right. So if nobody has anything, then that's all we had tonight.
I'll take a motion to adjourn this.
Oh, wait, hold on,
Go ahead,
just real quick. So we'll be voting at our meeting on Wednesday, and then we'll also over the next month be discussing town meeting and how we're going to do town meeting. So I would just put a call out, and if you want to put the call out to your constituents, we are looking for some feedback as to how we are going to do town meeting. It's been suggested we do it on the football field. It's been suggested that we do, drive-in movie style and somehow work that. It's been suggested we do a hybrid where, people who are comfortable going inside, go inside, people who are comfortable outside. As of right now, we cannot do remote participation for our town meeting. One, because legislatively we can't, and two, we would have to technically be available to be able to support all 11,000 registered voters remotely. And that's just not feasible. Mm-hmm. And identify who is on and voting. So, start thinking about that. And if you have input, or if as you talk to people, let them know to email us. Like I said, the potentials right now are everybody on the football field, half and half in the gym and in the parking lot, and somehow in cars in the parking lot. So any feedback, as well as we're going to work with our tech department and figure out how we can do this, because at this point, I think we all are aware that for both the public safety building and the school building, it would not be prudent to push the vote out to the spring because of costs and possibility of, especially for the school building project, what that would do to our place in line.
Right.
Yolanda, is there flexibility in the time of day it can be had? And
there's all kinds of flexibility. There's conversation about having it on a Saturday morning. Mm-hmm. So okay. Not having it in an evening. So we're thinking maybe that would make it a little more accessible to people if it's a Saturday morning. Mm-hmm. Certainly then you're not dealing with nighttime if you're doing it. So there is some flexibility in regards to that. Okay. So.
And we'll be switching gears on the building committee from what we've been doing. We've been head down getting the PS the schematic design ready and things like that, and to some of the things you asked, Mark, and even the estimation on tax impact and all those things. We'll be shifting gears. We'll be doing design development and shifting that to really hone that, but also shift to really supplying that more detailed content for anybody who needs to consume it. So it's something that matters to them, that whether it be trying to figure out how we can make it easy for a particular resident to compute what the impact is to them, right? Average tax home, well, who pays that, right? 3 people in Ashland pay it. Everybody else is either below or above that, right? Or whatever the case is. So figuring out ways to make the information meaningful to people we will be doing that, or we'll have time to do that. And so anybody that has anything like that, if you come up with an idea of something you think that is valuable from, hey, I'd really like this kind of data, by all means, shoot us an email so we can look to how we can present that. Some of them are going to be more complicated than others just because of how even trying to figure out the cash flow and how it relates to all those various categories and when we would be getting our reimbursement and then when we'd be capping out reimbursement along the way. Those are all more complicated things that we're going to be delving into. But anytime anybody thinks of something that would be valuable as a data point, shoot us an email, make sure we get that.
Yep. Okay. Okay, Lori, go ahead.
Where were we?
I'm
asking for a motion to adjourn.
Right.
I motion that the school committee adjourns.
I second that.
All in favor, Mark?
Aye.
Kathy? Paul?
Aye.
Aaron?
Aye.
And I as well. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Motion for the select board to adjourn.
Good night. Thank you for all your work, folks.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you. If I can get a second.
Second.
All those in favor? Joe?
Mignani, aye.
Brandy? Steve, I saw your hand. Rob, I saw your hand. And I say yes. Thank you. And the select board is adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
you,
you.
guys. Thank you, everyone.
Have a motion to adjourn the FinCom meeting, please.
Motion to adjourn the FinCom meeting.
A second? Great. Ashwini?
Aye.
Ryan?
Yes.
Jen?
Yes.
Jack?
Yes.
Ed?
Yes.
And I'm an aye. Thanks, guys. Have a great night.
Okay.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Go Bruins.